Hi guys, welcome back. So after we completed our model last time, I actually went and did some more corrections in our models. And for the top part, I actually added few more edge loops and I made it much more smooth and made it a little bit more detailed. And I added one more edge loop previously. In this extruded area we didn't had an extra edge loop, so I added one more edge loop and I just moved it a little bit down so it will have a curve. So the final image, final model, when we actually smooth it, it will have a proper depth and it will look much more nicer. So and for the base model, I actually went and bevel that corner edge, so it will actually preserve much more detail and we will have a much more clear door. So that's a extra things I did after completing the model. And since we completed this main mushroom house, the next part is we have to create the other two models, and we will be following the same process for the remaining models also. After that we will go and create this other details like this big plant and some grass and some extra details in the behind, and all that we will create once we actually completed these two other models. So let's start creating the next model. Next one will focus on this smaller one, and again we will actually start with the cylinder itself. First we'll go to the top view, and one more thing, if you want to see uh, outline on a shaded view, you can actually enable this wireframe on shaded option, and once you click on that you will get a wireframe on shaded, so it will be much clear, and each model where we actually uh, aligned and created each model, so it will have a much more clear compared to like simple shading. In simple shading sometimes you will not be able to see everything properly, so you can enable this wireframe on shaded option, so you will be able to see everything much more clearly and properly. So next thing is we'll just go to poly modeling shelf, and we'll start with our, and then we'll go to the front view and we'll just adjust the height and all. Okay, once that is done, you can just move it into position. Here also we'll just move it a little bit back. Okay, we'll just move it down a little bit, and again for the subdivision axis we'll just reduce it to 12. Once that is done, you can add subdivision heights, and you can add now itself subdivision heights, or otherwise what you can do is you can actually edit the vertex, like you can actually make it like, you can scale it down a little bit, you can rotate slightly, and you can make some small edits. After that you can actually add edge loops in between, and you can actually move them into position. This is also an easy way to edit and create your models, and it's actually depend on how you want to like your pipeline, your process to be. You can actually choose either one. You can actually beginning itself you can add all the polygons you want, or you can actually gradually add extra edge loops and develop it. And it's actually, in my opinion, adding polygons like while you're working, it will be much more effective way, so you will be able to control how much polygons you are actually adding. If you are actually starting creating with a defined poly count or something like that, sometimes you will end up with too much polygon, or otherwise you will not have enough polygons. So it will depend on how you are working, and my preferred option is while working only, I'll add extra polygons and edge loops, so it will actually help me to create much more realistic or effective models. And it's actually depend on how you want to proceed with that. At the end of the day, the main thing is you are achieving that, creating that model which you feel that it is like realistic. If you want realistic, you can create it according to that realism, or you can actually add little bit more creativity, or you can add much more creativity and make it much more stylized or something like that. Okay, once you completed that, since we don't have any other doors or any other details, you can actually just leave it there. And just like before, we are actually going to delete that faces in the bottom, and you can just select those faces, and you can deselect while selecting. You can select everything, and while deselecting, you can use the control button, control key on the keyboard, and you can deselect, then you can just delete. And I'm going to do the same thing in the top also. Since the top part will not be able to see the top part, and it will be like inside the head area, like head of that mushroom, so will not be able to visible, will not be able to see that part. So we can actually proceed with deleting that part also. Once that is done, you can actually follow the same procedure. You can go to top view, and here also we'll start with a one more cylinder, slightly bigger one, and we'll go to front view, and we'll just create it. Once that is done, you can just move it and align them, and we'll reduce the subdivision axis to 12. And this time we want the top to be like completely rounded. So what you can do is, first we'll isolate that model in perspective view, so we'll be able to focus it on much more. Okay, so once we completed creating that base model, we can actually add extra edge loops in between. I'll just start with one edge loop, and I'll just scale it slightly, so we'll have a little bit bump in the center. After that, I'll just select the top edge loop of the cylinder, and I'll just shift right click and enable the bevel edge option. Once you added that bevel edge option, you can see the top part is divided into two different and you can adjust fraction. And after that, in the segment section, we are going to add a few segments, and you can see as I add extra segments, it's actually becoming more and more round. So I'll just stick with 3, and for the top point vertex, I'll just select the vertex and I'll move it little bit up. Okay, so that is our mushroom head. After that, we will do the same thing we did last time. We are going to select all the polygons at the bottom, and we will just extrude, and we'll enable the scale option, and we'll just scale slightly, and we'll press G on the keyboard to re-enable the extrude option, and we'll just move it slightly inside, so we'll have a depth. Okay, so once that is done, again we'll add one more edge loop in this extruded area, and we'll just use the move tool to slightly move it down. Okay, so that is our model, and if you smooth it now, you can see the result. Okay, so if you want this to be a little bit more like a round, you can actually scale that edge loops much more, and you can make it much more round. It's the top part will be much more like a bowl shape. Okay, Now we actually completed that. The next thing is we have to rotate and align to our base model. So you can re-enable all the isolated objects, and you can just rotate it in the front view slightly, and you can just move it down and align it based on our model. And if once you are happy with that model, you can keep it. And if you want, you can actually scale them little bit more. You can actually move them. I'll just select both and move them, and so it will not touch with our main model. And you can just move it down a little bit. Okay, so that is our second model. So we will follow the same procedure, and we'll just continue the second one. So to continue the second main model, what we'll do is we'll just duplicate this base model we created earlier, and we'll duplicate it by pressing control, selecting the object and pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard. And once you selected pressed Ctrl D, a new model, a duplicate model will be created. And since you are actually now we actually duplicated the model, and now we want to rotate it to the other side. So what you can do is you can just enable the rotate tool by pressing E on the keyboard, and you can just rotate it. Once you rotate it correctly, in the channel box itself you can actually define the correct value in the y-axis minus 180, so it will be completely rotated to the other side. And once that is done, you can actually align it to a concept model, or you can just move it a little bit, and you can actually align the edges to the model itself. And here we'll just do the same thing. Just select all the vertex in the front view, and we'll just move it. And in between, if you want, you can add more edge loops. I'm going to scale the base a little bit more. Okay, so in between we need to add one more edge loop. So now I'm going to show you one more easy way to add edge loop. So if you want to add a edge loop, you do have to go back to object mode, and you have to go back and press too many buttons. So the easier way to add an edge loop is to select one edge, and you can select any edges between two edge loops, like this top one and bottom one. You can select any edge loop, and you can press Ctrl right click, and here you can go to edge ring utilities, and you can select to edge ring and split. So what happens is the selected edge will be splitted into two parts and added an extra edge loop. So while you are working fast, you can actually use this option, and it will be much more faster compared to selecting edge loop and doing it. So if you want to add multiple edge loops, then you can select the edge loop option, and that is much more effective. So this way you can actually add an edge loop, and it will always add the edge loop in between, in the exact center between that earlier two edge loops. So this is much easier way to do that. So once you align everything according to that model itself, you can actually press 3 on the keyboard and check how it is. And once that is done, you can actually scale the model and you can just move it down and align with the completed models. Okay, so once you aligned everything properly, and this time for the okay, so for the head of our mushroom model, I'm going to duplicate from the original itself. So I'll just press Ctrl D on the keyboard, and now you can see it's actually the move tool and the rotate tool, it's actually not aligned properly. It's actually aligned to the objects itself. So the object, since the object is rotated, and the tool is also rotated, and you can see the all the values in the channel box also, it's actually have a lot of values and it's not actually properly aligned. So what you can do is, in order to align everything properly, you can actually go to the modify button, and you can actually here you can freeze the transformation. That means once you selected a particular object and freeze that transformation, all these channel box values will be set to 0, and all the tools will be reset. Okay, so what you can do is, you can just select the object and you can go to modify button, and you can just select a freeze transformation value. Once you selected that, the entire value will be reset, and even the tools also will be resetted, but the object itself will be staying in that scaled or rotate or moved value itself. So the object will not have any changes, only the values will be changed. So once that is done, you can actually move that particular object to any location you want. You can scale them, and while doing that, new values will be generated, and it will be aligned according to whatever changes you are making now itself. Okay, now we actually completed all the mushroom models, and you can actually rotate and scale them as you wish, and you can make all the changes you want. Okay, once you are happy with that final model, you can move on to the next model itself. And now we actually completed all the mushroom models and everything, and in the next video onwards, we'll be start creating our plant and rest of the small models. So I will see you guys in the next video.